you, my colleague from North Carolina. That concludes the opening statements by members, and now we'll turn to our witness panel for today's hearing. First up is Susan P. Bodine, Assistant Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for Solid Waste and Emergency Response. Next, we'll have Mark E. Ray, Undersecretary for Natural Resources and the Environment at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And from the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, joining us is Mark Johnson, a Senior Environmental Health Scientist. Our final witness is from the Government Accountability Office, Ms. Anu Mittal, lead author of today's GAO report on concentrated animal feeding operations. We'll now recognize each of our witnesses in turn for 5-minute statements summarizing their prepared testimony. Prepared testimony submitted in advance of the hearing will be made part of the record. And before we begin, I'd like to make it a unanimous consent request. I ask unanimous consent to include the following documents in the record. First, a letter dated March 18, 2008 from Mr. Dingle and Ms. Solis to the EPA and EPA's response dated April 17, 2008. Second, a letter dated March 27, 2008 from Timothy R. Gablehouse and the National Association of SARA Title III Program officials to the EPA. And third, a January 28, 2008 Congressional Research Service memorandum to the House Energy and Commerce Committee entitled Emergency Planning Committee Comments on Poultry Petition. And fourth, a letter dated September 19, 2008 from the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry and the Minnesota Department of Health to the EPA and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Is there objection?
Mr. Chairman, I reserve the right to object, and for now I will object because our staff has not been able to see and read all of those documents. So pending their ability to do so, I would object to their inclusion in the record.
Okay. I'm aware we gave these to you about 15 minutes ago, but be glad to hold off on introducing them in the record so you'll have a chance to review them.
We have lots of speed readers, but we've been using them for other purposes.
Okay. Assistant Administrator Bodine, will begin with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to appear today to talk about the requirements for notification of releases of hazardous substances under both CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, as well as under EPCRA, which is the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, as well as EPA's proposed rule to exempt air releases of hazardous substances from animal waste, that is manure, from these notification requirements. In addition, Mr. Chairman, pursuant to your request in your invitation letter to me, we have provided to you a summary of the status of EPA's air compliance agreement, the status of sites, NPL sites that were impacted by Hurricane Ike, and a chart, a summary of EPA Superfund cost, construction completion since 1993. In addition, you had asked for the reports filed under CERCLA and EPCRA since the year 2000 for releases from animal feeding operations. What I have, and I would like to provide this for you right now, is a summary of reports since 2000 to the National Response Center. EPA actually doesn't get reports that are filed under EPCRA. We don't have those reports. But the National Response Center gets the CERCLA reports, and I've got the summary to provide to you for the record. It's my staff's estimate. Your question related to animal feeding operations, they have to look at the reports and look at the kind of release that's reported to determine whether it was from a farm or not a farm, because the NRC doesn't actually collect facility information. So I have that here. Now I'm back to discussing the reporting requirements. Under CERCLA, a person in charge of a facility has to report if a hazardous substance has been released into the environment in excess of a reportable quantity in a 24-hour period. That report goes to the Coast Guard headquarters. It's the National Response Center. The purpose of that report is to notify the federal government of the release, so then federal emergency response personnel can decide whether an action is necessary to be taken. Now, under EPCRA, Section 304 of EPCRA, a facility owner or operator has to report a release of an extremely hazardous substance. Now, that report goes to local emergency planning committees as well as to the State Emergency Response Commission. And again, same purpose. The report serves the purpose of letting those officials make a determination of whether a response is appropriate. As Congressman Shadegg noted, EPA has not responded, has never initiated a response to any notice to the National Response Center of a release of ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, or any other hazardous substance from animal waste at farms. Back in December of 2007, the agency published a proposed rulemaking that would propose to exempt from both CERCLA Section 103 as well as the CERCLA, EPGRO 304 requirements to exempt releases just to the air where the source is animal waste at farms. And the rationale is explained in that proposal, but the rationale is based on the purpose of those reporting requirements. It's an emergency response program. The purpose is to notify emergency response personnel of a release so they can determine whether to respond, and then based on information that we had about whether a response to that kind of a release would, or kind of a report would be very likely. Again, we're not talking about water, we're talking about releases to air. We're not talking about other sources of hazardous substances that may be present. We're talking about manure. And in addition, the proposal only would create an administrative reporting exemption. It doesn't affect any of EPA's other authorities, whether it's our response authorities under 104, any liability that might occur under Section 107 of CERCLA. Again, all those, and any authorities that the agency would have to deal with an issue is retained, and the proposal deals just with that reporting requirement. There was a public comment period of 90 days. It closed on March 27th. We are currently evaluating comments, and when we have a final proposal, we will have a response to comments document that will be in the record. And that concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions.